After 43 years of marriage, I buried my husband with trembling hands and a shattered heart. 3 days later, I opened the locked drawer he forbade me to touch. Inside was a wedding ring with another woman's name engraved inside. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. If you saw me at the grocery store or sitting in church on Sunday mornings, you'd probably think I was just another elderly woman living out her quiet golden years. But 3 months ago, my entire life revealed itself to be a carefully constructed lie, and the man I trusted more than anyone on earth turned out to be a stranger. For over 4 decades, I was the kind of wife that people pointed to as an example. I woke up every single morning at 6 o'clock to brew Robert's coffee exactly the way he liked it. 2 sugars, just a splash of cream, stirred counterclockwise 3 times because he said it tasted better that way. I cook 3 meals a day from scratch. Pot roast on Sundays, chicken casserole on Wednesdays, his favorite lemon meringue pie for every special occasion. When our 3 children were young, I was the mother who never missed a school play, who sewed Halloween costumes by hand, who stayed up until midnight helping with science projects. I did all of this while Robert built his real estate development business, working long hours and traveling frequently for deals. I never complained, not once. When he missed our son's baseball games because of work, I cheered loud enough for both of us. When he forgot our anniversary because he was closing a big contract, I smiled and said we'd celebrate next week. When his parents grew old and sick, I moved them into our home and cared for them for 3 years until they passed, bathing them, feeding them, sitting with them through long, painful nights while Robert slept soundly in our bed. I was the grandmother who babysat every single weekend so my children could have date nights. I was the friend who organized church fundraisers and volunteered at the food bank every Thursday. I was the neighbor who brought casseroles when someone was sick and watered plants when people went on vacation. Everyone in our small town knew me as the woman who stood by her man through thick and thin, who never had a bad word to say about anyone, who made everyone feel welcomed and loved. I believed our marriage was solid as stone. Sure, we weren't passionate like newlyweds anymore, but we were comfortable. We were partners. We were best friends. Or at least, that's what I told myself during all those evenings when Robert locked himself in his home office for hours, telling me he was working on boring paperwork that wouldn't interest me. That's what I believed during all those business trips, where he'd be gone for a week at a time. That's what I convinced myself when he kept that bottom drawer locked and told me never to touch it. I trusted him completely. I loved him with everything I had. I built my entire identity around being his wife, his support system, his safe harbor. I thought I knew everything about the man I'd spent 43 years beside. I didn't know anything at all, and the truth was locked in a drawer I was never supposed to open. Life before that terrible discovery felt like a comfortable routine I'd perfected over the years. Every single morning played out like a well-rehearsed dance. My alarm would go off at 6, and I'd slip quietly out of bed, careful not to wake Robert. He always looked peaceful when he slept, his face relaxed and younger somehow, like the man I'd fallen in love with all those decades ago. The kitchen would fill with the rich aroma of fresh coffee as I started breakfast. I'd hear the shower running upstairs, then Robert's footsteps on the stairs exactly 17 minutes later. He'd walk into the kitchen in his pressed suit, his silver hair still damp, and kiss my cheek. "Morning, sweetheart," he'd say, the same greeting every single day for 43 years. "What would I do without you?" "Starve, probably," I'd tease back, setting his plate in front of him. Scrambled eggs, 2 pieces of wheat toast, a small bowl of fresh fruit. He'd read the newspaper while eating, occasionally sharing a headline or chuckling at the comics. These were the moments I treasured, the quiet, simple intimacy of 2 people who'd built a life together. After he left for his office downtown at 8:30, the house would settle into a comfortable silence. I'd spend my mornings tending to my garden, the one Robert had built for me on our 20th anniversary. My roses were the pride of the neighborhood. deep red blooms that I pruned and fertilized with the same devotion I gave to everything else in my life. Mrs. Chen from next door would often wave from her yard. "Your roses are gorgeous as always, Margaret," she'd call out. "Thank you, dear. I'll bring you some cuttings tomorrow," I'd reply, already mentally planning which stems to clip. Tuesday afternoons were for volunteering at St. Mary's Church, helping Father Michael organize the food pantry. Thursdays, I had my book club with Linda and the other ladies from the neighborhood. We'd been meeting for 15 years, discussing everything from romance novels to murder mysteries, drinking tea and eating homemade cookies. Fridays, I'd drive to the community center to teach basic computer skills to other seniors who wanted to learn how to video chat with their grandchildren. But the best days were Sundays. Every single Sunday, without fail, our children would come for dinner. Sarah with her husband Tom and their 2 boys. Michael with his wife Jennifer and their daughter. David, still unmarried, but bringing whatever girlfriend he was dating at the time. The house would fill with noise and laughter and the chaos of family. I'd cook all afternoon, pot roast, with roasted vegetables, homemade rolls, apple pie for dessert. Robert would sit at the head of the table, carving the meat, telling stories about his latest real estate deals while the grandchildren climbed on his lap. "You've got the perfect life, Mom," Sarah told me once while helping me wash dishes. "Seriously, you and Dad are relationship goals." I'd smiled, warm water running over my hands, feeling utterly content. "We've been blessed," I'd said simply. Every evening, Robert would retreat to his home office around 7. I'd hear the lock click. He said he did it out of habit from keeping business documents secure, and I'd settle into my favorite chair with a book or my knitting. Around 9, he'd emerge, we'd watch the news together, and then we'd go to bed. It was predictable. It was routine. It was everything I'd ever wanted. It was also completely fake. It started 3 months before Robert died, on an ordinary Wednesday morning while I was doing laundry. I'd always been meticulous about checking pockets before washing. Robert had accidentally left important business cards in his suits before, and I'd learned my lesson. I reached into his gray jacket pocket, the one he wore to important meetings, and my fingers touched a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out and smoothed it flat against the washing machine. It was a receipt from Sheffield & Sons Fine Jewelry, a high-end store located 2 towns over in Millbrook. The paper had yellowed slightly with age, and when I looked at the date, my stomach did a small flip. June 2019. 5 years ago, the receipt showed a purchase for $1,200, a significant amount of money. I stood there in the laundry room, the washing machine humming beside me, trying to remember what Robert had given me in June 2019. Our anniversary was in August, not June. My birthday was in March. Christmas was obviously December. I searched my memory going through that entire year, month by month. Nothing. He hadn't given me any jewelry that year at all. Actually, Robert rarely gave me jewelry. My wedding ring was the only piece of real value I owned, and I'd been wearing it for 43 years. He usually gave me practical gifts: a new mixer, a gardening tool set, a warm coat. I'd always told myself I preferred practical things anyway. But $1,200 at a jewelry store? That wasn't practical. That was significant. That was intentional. I folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into my pocket, my mind churning through possibilities. Maybe it was for Sarah, a graduation gift for our granddaughter? But no, she'd graduated in 2020, not 2019. Maybe for Jennifer, Michael's wife, for her birthday? But I'd been at that birthday dinner, and Robert had given her a gift card to her favorite restaurant, not jewelry. That evening at dinner, I tried to keep my voice casual and light. "Honey, I found an old receipt in your jacket today, from that jewelry store in Millbrook, Sheffield & Sons." Robert's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. It was only for a second, barely noticeable, but I saw it. His shoulders tensed, his eyes widened just a fraction. Then, just as quickly, he relaxed and let out a laugh that sounded almost too loud in our quiet dining room. "Oh, that old thing?" He waved his hand dismissively and took a bite of meatloaf. "I probably picked it up off the ground in a parking lot or something. You know how receipts blow around everywhere. It was folded in your pocket, I said, watching his face carefully. Was it? He shrugged, reaching for his water glass. Honestly, sweetheart, I have no idea. You know how absent-minded I can be. I probably stuck some random paper in my pocket years ago and forgot about it. Why, is it important? No, I suppose not, I said quietly. But something felt wrong. The explanation was reasonable enough, but his reaction wasn't. The momentary tension, the slightly too loud laugh, the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. That night, I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing. Through the wall, I could hear the grandfather clock in the hallway ticking away the seconds. Around midnight, I heard his phone buzz softly on his nightstand. He stirred, grabbed it, and I watched through barely opened eyes as he glanced at the screen. His face was illuminated by the blue glow. He looked at whatever message had come through for a long moment, then carefully placed the phone face down and went back to sleep. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, that receipt burning a hole in my mind. Retrieve. I pushed the thoughts away like you'd push away a bad dream. This was Robert. My Robert. The man who'd proposed to me under a starlit sky 43 years ago, who'd held my hand through 3 difficult pregnancies, who'd cried in my arms when his mother died. The man who'd built me a garden, who still kissed me goodbye every morning, who called me sweetheart. People don't live double lives. That was something that happened in movies, not in small-town America, not in tidy houses with rose gardens and Sunday dinners. I started making excuses for everything. The jewelry receipt? Probably exactly what he said, just some random paper he'd picked up and forgotten about. Robert dealt with dozens of receipts every day for his business. It made perfect sense that he'd absent-mindedly pocketed one that wasn't his. The late-night phone calls? Business, obviously. Real estate deals happened at all hours. Clients called from different time zones. I was being ridiculous for even wondering. When Linda called me for our weekly coffee date, I almost mentioned the receipt, but then she started talking about her husband Mark's recent behavior. He's been so distant lately, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with sharp, angry movements. Always on his phone, always working late. I swear, Margaret, if I find out he's cheating, I'll take him for everything he's worth. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Oh, Linda, I'm sure it's nothing. You can't jump to conclusions like that. You'll drive yourself crazy with suspicion. You're right, she sighed. I'm probably just being paranoid, but it's hard not to wonder, you know? I know, I said softly, feeling a sharp stab of hypocrisy. But not all men are unfaithful. Look at Robert and me. 43 years and we still tell each other everything. You just have to trust. Trust. I repeated that word to myself like a prayer. I'd built my entire marriage on trust. Suspicious wives were unhappy wives. They were the bitter women at the grocery store who checked their husband's phone, who called their offices to verify they were really working late, who hired private investigators and destroyed their marriages with paranoia. I refused to become one of them. So when Robert started taking longer showers, I told myself he was just getting older and taking his time. When I noticed he'd bought new cologne, something expensive I didn't recognize, I convinced myself he was just trying to feel young again. When he started password protecting his phone, something he'd never done before, I rationalized that his business partner had suggested it for security reasons. Every small inconsistency, every tiny red flag, I buried under layers of justification and denial. I was protecting my marriage, I told myself. I was being a good wife. I was refusing to let baseless suspicions poison the beautiful life we'd built together. At night, I'd lie beside him and study his profile in the darkness. This face I'd memorized over 4 decades. The slight hook in his nose from a childhood injury, the way his eyebrows grew bushier with age, the scar on his chin from a shaving accident. I knew this man. I knew him completely, except I didn't know him at all. Looking back now, I realize I wasn't protecting my marriage. I was protecting a beautiful lie because the truth was too terrifying to consider. I was protecting the version of myself who'd sacrificed everything for a man who deserved none of it. I was protecting a fantasy that was already dead. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in late July. One moment he was sitting at the kitchen table reading the newspaper, commenting on an article about the local mayor's re-election campaign. The next moment his face went pale, his hand clutched at his chest, and he made a sound I'll never forget. A sharp gasp followed by silence. I screamed his name and called 911, but by the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone. Massive heart attack. The paramedics said he probably didn't feel much pain. I suppose that was meant to comfort me. The funeral was a blur of black dresses and sad faces. People kept hugging me, saying things like, "He lived a good life," and "At least it was quick," and "You'll get through this." I nodded and thanked them and accepted their casseroles and sympathy cards, moving through it all like a ghost. Sarah held my left arm, Michael held my right, and David stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder as they lowered Robert's casket into the ground. I didn't cry. I felt numb, hollowed out, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left just a shell standing there in sensible black heels. After 3 days of visitors and phone calls and arrangements, the house finally fell silent. My children had gone back to their own lives, promising to check on me daily. The neighbors had stopped bringing food. The sympathy cards had all been opened and read. I wandered through the empty rooms, not knowing what to do with myself. I found myself standing in front of Robert's office door. For 43 years, this room had been his private sanctuary, and I'd respected that boundary without question. But he was gone now. I needed to sort through his papers, cancel his subscriptions, close his business accounts, notify his clients. It was my responsibility now. My hand shook as I reached for the doorknob, locked, of course. I searched for the key in the obvious places first. The kitchen drawer where we kept spare keys, the bowl on the hallway table. Nothing. Finally, I opened his wallet, which was still sitting on the dresser where the hospital had returned it, with his other belongings. Behind his driver's license, I found a small silver key. The office was exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses on the desk, a half-empty coffee mug, papers stacked neatly in organized piles. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne. I sat down in his chair and started opening drawers methodically, forcing myself to focus. Top right drawer, pens, paper clips, sticky notes. Top left drawer, files labeled with client names. Middle drawer, calculator, checkbook, stamps. Then I reached the bottom right drawer. I pulled the handle, locked separately. My heart started pounding. Why would one drawer need an extra lock? I searched the desk, running my hands along the underside, checking behind picture frames, looking in the pencil holder. Finally, my fingers found it. A tiny key, taped underneath the desk, hidden where no one would accidentally discover it. I sat there for a long moment, holding that small key, some instinct warning me that opening this drawer would change everything. Part of me wanted to throw the key away, to leave whatever was inside locked forever, to preserve the memory of the man I thought I'd married, but I'd never been a coward. I unlocked the drawer. Inside was a small polished wooden box. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. Nestled in black velvet was a woman's wedding ring, delicate, gold, clearly expensive. It wasn't mine. Mine was still on my finger where it had been for 43 years. I picked up the ring and turned it toward the window light. Inside, engraved in elegant script, were words that stopped my heart. Robert and Catherine forever. June 14, 1982. June 14, 1982, the day Robert married me. The room tilted sideways. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself, the ring still clutched in my trembling hand. Catherine. Who was Catherine? My mind raced through every woman Robert had ever mentioned. Coworkers, clients, neighbors. I couldn't remember anyone named Catherine. And the date. June 14, 1982. That was our wedding day. Our wedding day. The only explanation made my stomach turn. 2 weddings. Same day. Two brides who had no idea about each other. No, I whispered to the empty room. No, no, no. This can't be real. But the ring in my hand was solid and real and engraved with proof I couldn't deny. With shaking fingers, I set it on the desk and looked back into the drawer. Beneath the wooden box was a stack of letters bound together with a faded blue ribbon. I pulled them out. The return address on the top envelope read, Catherine Miller, 247 Riverside Drive, Burlington, Vermont, 3 hours away from our town in New Hampshire. I untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. The paper was cream-colored, the handwriting feminine and neat. My dearest Robert, I'm missing you terribly while you're away on this business trip. The house feels empty without you. Thomas asked when Daddy would be home, and I didn't have the heart to tell him it would be another week. But I understand. The business needs you. We're so proud of how hard you work for our family. All my love, Catherine. Thomas. She mentioned someone named Thomas. A son? I opened another letter with fumbling fingers. Robert, Emily's school play is next Friday. I know you said you'd be traveling for work, but she's been practicing her lines for weeks and keeps asking if you'll be there. Please try to make it home if you can. She adores her father. Missing you always, Catherine. Emily, a daughter. My vision blurred with tears. These weren't letters from a mistress. These were letters from a wife with children, a wife who believed Robert was her husband, traveling for business, coming home to her. I tore through more letters, each one driving the knife deeper into my chest. The kids and I can't wait for Christmas. Thank you for the beautiful anniversary gift. We had such a wonderful time at the beach house last summer. Years and years of letters, documenting a complete family life I'd known nothing about. Then I found the photographs. They were tucked in a manila envelope at the very bottom of the drawer. My hands shook so badly I could barely open it. The first photo showed Robert standing with a woman I'd never seen. Petite, blonde, pretty, smiling up at him with obvious love. His arm was around her waist. They were standing in front of a house with blue shutters. The next photo showed Robert holding two small children, a boy and a girl, maybe 6 and 8 years old. The boy had Robert's nose. The girl had his eyes. They were his children. Children he'd never mentioned. Children I'd never known existed. There was a photo of Robert at what looked like a high school graduation, his arm around a teenage girl in a cap and gown. Another of him at a dining table with the same woman and 2 adult children, everyone laughing at something. He hadn't just been having an affair, he'd been living an entire separate life, a complete parallel existence with another wife, other children, other memories, other holidays, other everything. While I was cooking his breakfast in New Hampshire, she was waiting for him to come home to Vermont. While I was celebrating Christmas with our 3 children, he was probably celebrating it again with her family. 43 years. 43 years of lies. I spent the entire night in that office, unable to sleep, unable to look away from the evidence of Robert's double life. But as the shock began to wear off and cold clarity set in, a new terrifying thought emerged. If Robert had maintained 2 complete families for over 40 years, he'd needed substantial money, a lot of money, more than I'd ever seen in our joint bank account. At dawn, I opened Robert's filing cabinet with a new sense of purpose. I started pulling out financial documents I'd never bothered to examine before. Robert had always handled the money. "Don't worry your pretty head about finances, sweetheart," he'd say whenever I asked about our accounts. "I've got it all under control." I'd been content to let him manage everything, trusting that he was providing for our future. What a fool I'd been. I called Robert's accountant, Gerald Morrison, first thing that morning. "Gerald, I need to understand Robert's complete financial situation. Everything. I need access to all accounts, all investments, all assets." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Margaret, I'm so sorry for your loss. Of course I can help you with that. Why don't you come by my office this afternoon?" When I arrived, Gerald looked uncomfortable. He kept adjusting his tie, avoiding eye contact as he spread documents across his desk. Now, Margaret, some of this might be confusing, but just show me everything, I interrupted, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. What he showed me made my blood run cold. The modest life Robert had always claimed we were living was a complete fabrication. The real estate business he'd told me was doing okay was actually worth over $4 million. The rental properties he'd said barely broke even were generating nearly $30,000 a month in income. There were investment accounts I'd never heard of, stock portfolios in his name alone, and a vacation property in the Bahamas I didn't know existed. Where did all this money go? I demanded. I've been living on a tight budget for years. Robert always said we needed to be careful with money. Gerald shifted uncomfortably. He set up several trusts and offshore accounts for tax purposes, he said. Show me. The more I dug, the worse it got. Robert had created a complex web of shell companies and trusts, systematically funneling money away from our joint accounts into separate accounts I'd never known about. He'd been giving me just enough to run the household while hiding millions. Then Gerald pulled out a file that made everything clear. There's also the matter of his will. Actually, wills. Plural. My hands clenched into fists. What do you mean, plural? Robert had me draft 2 separate estate plans, one for you, which leaves you the house and a small life insurance policy of $50,000, and another. He slid a document across the desk. Another for a Catherine Miller in Vermont, which leaves her the bulk of his business assets, investment properties, and the remainder of his estate, approximately $3.8 million. I stared at the papers, seeing the truth in black and white. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just a secret family. This was calculated financial fraud. Robert had spent 43 years using me as a convenient cover, the respectable wife in the respectable town, while he built his real life elsewhere with someone else. He'd worked me like a servant, taken my best years, let me sacrifice everything for our family, and planned to leave me with almost nothing. He hadn't just betrayed my heart. He'd stolen my entire future. And he'd done it all deliberately, methodically, for over 4 decades. I didn't leave my bedroom for 3 days. I called Sarah and told her I had the flu, that I needed to be alone, that I'd be fine. She offered to come stay with me, but I couldn't bear to see anyone. I couldn't bear to explain what I'd discovered. I couldn't bear to say the words out loud and make them real. I lay in the dark with the curtains drawn, replaying 43 years of marriage like a horror film. Every memory was now poisoned. Every moment I'd treasured was now a lie. Had he ever loved me? Was our wedding day just a transaction to him? When he said his vows to me, was he already planning to say them again to someone else? I thought about our honeymoon in Niagara Falls. He'd gotten an urgent business call on our 3rd day and left me alone in the hotel for 2 entire days. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," he'd said, kissing my forehead. "This deal can't wait. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I'd cried alone in that hotel room, feeling abandoned, but I'd forgiven him because I thought he was building our future. Now I knew the truth. He was with her. He was on his 2nd honeymoon with Catherine while I sat alone eating room service and wondering what I'd done wrong. Every anniversary came back to me with sickening clarity. Every year, Robert would take me to the same local restaurant, give me flowers, and toast to our life together. It was always on a weeknight, never the weekend. "Weekends are too crowded," he'd explain. Now I understood. He was saving the weekends for her, for his real anniversary celebration with his real wife. The Christmas mornings when he'd suddenly have to check on a property emergency and disappear for hours. The birthdays when his gifts felt like afterthoughts. The times I'd wanted to take a vacation and he'd say, "Maybe next year, sweetheart. Money's tight right now." Money wasn't tight. He just didn't want to waste it on me. I pulled out our wedding album, the white leather worn soft with age. There I was, 29 years, old, radiant in my simple dress, looking at Robert like he hung the moon. My mother stood beside me, proud and teary-eyed. She died 10 years ago, never knowing her son-in-law was a fraud. Thank God she never knew. It would have broken her heart. I looked at Robert in the photos. Young, handsome, smiling. Had he felt anything standing at that altar with me? Or was he just counting down the hours until he could drive to Vermont and do it all again? On the fourth day, Sarah showed up unannounced with soup and medicine. She found me on the closet floor, surrounded by photo albums and Catherine's letters, my face swollen from crying, still wearing the same nightgown I'd had on for 3 days. "Mom!" She dropped the soup and fell to her knees beside me. "Mom, what's wrong? What happened?" I couldn't speak. I just handed her one of the letters and watched her face change as she read it. Horror, disbelief, then fury. "That bastard," she whispered. "That lying bastard." She held me while I sobbed, my body shaking with the kind of grief that comes from losing everything you thought was real. I wasn't crying for Robert. I was crying for Margaret, the woman who'd given 43 years to a man who'd never deserved a single day. That woman was gone. The life I'd built was a fiction. I had nothing left but the truth, and the truth had destroyed me. On the fourth morning, something inside me snapped. I woke up and caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror, hair tangled, eyes red and swollen, face pale and drawn. I looked like a ghost. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like what Robert had tried to make me, a victim who would accept her fate quietly and disappear into irrelevance. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. She'd been a strong woman who'd raised 4 children after my father died young, working 2 jobs and never once complaining. "Margaret," she'd told me when I was young, "life will knock you down, that's guaranteed, but you get to decide whether you stay down or get back up swinging." I stared at that broken woman in the mirror and made a decision. I wasn't staying down. I'd survived 3 difficult pregnancies that the doctors said might kill me. I'd nursed both of Robert's parents through terminal cancer, changing bedpans and administering medication while he couldn't handle seeing them like that. I'd put myself through night school to earn my teaching degree before I even met Robert, working full-time during the day and studying until midnight. I'd built a life with my own 2 hands, raised 3 good children, and created a home that people admired. Robert hadn't made me. I'd made myself. And I'd be damned if I'd let his betrayal be the thing that finally broke me. I got in the shower, scrubbing away 3 days of grief and despair. I washed my hair, put on clean clothes, and applied makeup for the first time since the funeral. When I looked in the mirror again, I saw someone different. Not the grieving widow, not the naive fool who'd been deceived for 43 years. I saw a 72-year-old woman who'd been knocked down but was getting back up. And I was angry. I picked up my phone and called Sarah. My voice was steady, cold, harder than she'd ever heard it. "Honey, I need you to recommend the best lawyer you know, not a family friend, not someone nice, not someone who'll try to be fair and reasonable. I need someone ruthless, someone who destroys people in court." There was silence on the other end, then, "Mom, are you okay?" "No, but I will be." The lawyer's name, Sarah. Patricia Chen. She's a shark. She handled my friend's divorce and took her ex for everything. "But Mom, what's this about?" "I'll explain later. Give me her number." Next, I called my son-in-law Marcus, who worked as a forensic accountant. "Marcus, I need your professional help. I need you to trace every single penny Robert had. Every account, every investment, every hidden asset. Can you do that?" "Of course, Margaret. When do you want to start?" "Today." Finally, I called Linda. "Remember when you told me your husband was cheating and I said you were being paranoid? I need the name of that private investigator you mentioned." Linda's voice turned serious immediately. "Margaret, what did you find?" "Everything. I found everything. And I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what Robert really was." I hung up and looked around Robert's office, his kingdom of lies. He built this web of deception so carefully, thinking he was clever, thinking he'd gotten away with it. He thought I was too simple, too trusting, too devoted to ever question him. He'd underestimated me. That was his first mistake, and I was going to make sure it was his last. Retry if Patricia Chen's office was on the 10th floor of a glass building downtown. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 50s with steel gray hair cut in a precise bob and eyes that missed nothing. When I walked in, carrying a box full of evidence, she gestured to the chair across from her massive desk. "Mrs. Harrison, Sarah spoke very highly of you. She also said you needed someone ruthless." Patricia leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Tell me everything." I laid it all out. The ring, the letters, the photographs, the two families, the hidden assets, the dual wills. When I finished, Patricia sat back in her chair with something that looked almost like admiration on her face. "Mrs. Harrison, your husband was running a sophisticated long-term fraud operation, and we're going to dismantle every single piece of it." She outlined the strategy with military precision. First, we'd file an emergency motion to freeze all of Robert's assets before they could be transferred to Catherine through the secret will. Every account, every property, every investment would be locked down pending investigation. "But I don't want to hurt Catherine," I said firmly. "She's a victim, too. She didn't know about me any more than I knew about her." Patricia nodded, approvingly. "Good. That makes you sympathetic, which helps our case. But she's still entitled to nothing from an invalid will created through fraud." Second, Marcus would conduct a complete forensic audit of Robert's finances for the past 20 years. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every suspicious payment would be documented and traced. "We need to prove systematic concealment and intent to defraud," Patricia explained. "Your son-in-law's findings will be crucial evidence." Third, the private investigator Linda recommended, a former FBI agent named James Cooper, would locate Catherine and document her life. "We need to establish that she genuinely believed she was his only wife," Patricia said. "That proves Robert was running a deliberate con on both of you." But then I made a decision that surprised even Patricia. "I want to contact Catherine directly. I want to meet her." "That's risky," Patricia warned. "She could become hostile." "She won't," I said with certainty I couldn't explain. "She's been lied to just like I have. She deserves to hear the truth from me, not from lawyers and courts. And if we're both willing to testify about what he did to us, our case becomes bulletproof." Patricia considered this, then slowly nodded. "All right, I'll draft a letter for you to send her, but we do this carefully." Over the next 2 weeks, the plan took shape. Marcus traced millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts, building an undeniable paper trail. James Cooper located Catherine in Burlington, Vermont, a retired schoolteacher, 70 years old, living in a modest house with blue shutters. He reported that she appeared to be a kind, ordinary woman who had no idea she was part of a massive deception. I wrote Catherine a letter, my hands shaking as I sealed the envelope. I included copies of my marriage certificate, photos of my family, and a simple request. "I think we need to talk. We've both been lied to by the same man." Meanwhile, Patricia assembled a team. She gathered witnesses who'd attended my wedding, old friends, family members, church members, and had them write affidavits confirming the timeline. She hired a forensic psychologist to analyze Robert's behavior patterns and prepare to testify about the level of planning required for this type of long-term deception. "We're not just going after his estate," Patricia told me during our final planning meeting. "We're going to expose exactly who Robert Harrison really was. When we're done, everyone will know the truth." I smiled for the first time in weeks. Good. That's exactly what I want. Catherine's response came 10 days after I sent my letter. The envelope was postmarked from Burlington, and my hands trembled as I opened it at my kitchen table. Her handwriting was elegant, controlled, but I could sense the emotion behind each word. Dear Margaret, I received your letter and spent 3 days in shock, unable to believe what you were telling me. But then I hired an investigator of my own, and everything you said was true. I have been married to a ghost, to a man who was never fully mine. We need to meet. We need to face this together. I will come to the courthouse. Catherine. Patricia scheduled the probate hearing for October 15th, exactly 3 months after Robert's death. The goal was to address the competing wills, the fraud allegations, and the asset freeze all at once. Word spread through our small town like wildfire. I couldn't go to the grocery store without people staring and whispering. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. Prominent businessman's secret life exposed after death. National media picked it up. Reporters called my house constantly. My children were devastated and furious. Sarah cried for hours when she learned the truth. He wasn't who we thought he was, Mom. Our whole childhood was a lie. Michael punched a hole in his kitchen wall when he found out about his half-siblings in Vermont. David stopped speaking entirely, processing his grief in silence. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit. Sarah insisted on coming with me. Michael and David flanked me on either side as we walked up the courthouse steps, past the reporters shouting questions and cameras flashing. Inside, the lobby was packed. Robert's business partner, James Whitmore, stood near the windows, pale and sweating. He'd helped facilitate the financial arrangements, and he knew it. The lawyer who drafted the secret will, Edward Cross, sat on a bench looking like he wanted to disappear. His reputation was on the line, possibly his entire career. Then Catherine arrived. The crowd parted as she walked through the courthouse doors, and for a moment time seemed to stop. She was my age, maybe slightly younger, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a simple black dress. We looked at each other across that crowded lobby. 2 women who'd loved the same man, 2 women who'd been betrayed by the same lies. She walked toward me slowly. Neither of us spoke. We just stood there, studying each other's faces, seeing our own pain reflected back. The bailiff's voice boomed through the hallway. All rise for the Honorable Judge Victoria Brennan. The probate hearing for the estate of Robert Harrison is now in session. The courtroom filled quickly. Family members, friends, curious onlookers, reporters. Patricia stood at our table, a thick folder of evidence in front of her. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s who'd clearly already reviewed the case files. Patricia rose, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, what we're about to reveal is not just estate fraud. It's a systematic deception spanning 4 decades that requires complete exposure and justice. Patricia began methodically, like a surgeon making precise incisions. She projected documents onto the screen at the front of the courtroom. Your Honor, Robert Harrison maintained 2 legal marriages simultaneously for 43 years. Here are both marriage certificates, both valid, both filed with their respective county clerks. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Catherine gripped the armrest of her chair. I sat perfectly still, my spine straight. Patricia continued displaying financial records. Mr. Harrison created an elaborate network of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide approximately $4.2 million in assets from both wives. He funneled money systematically, giving each woman just enough to maintain a household while concealing his true wealth. She showed emails between Robert and James Whitmore. His business partner knew about both families and actively helped move money between accounts to prevent discovery. James hung his head in the back of the courtroom. Photographs appeared on the screen. Robert with me at our wedding, Robert with Catherine at hers, both dated the same day. Robert with our children, Robert with her children. 2 complete lives side by side. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. But that's not all, Your Honor. Patricia's voice dropped, and something in her tone made my blood run cold. We discovered something even Mr. Harrison's wives didn't know. She clicked to a new document. 3 months before his death, Robert Harrison contacted a lawyer in Costa Rica about establishing a new identity under the name Richard Morrison. He was planning to fake his own death. The courtroom erupted. I grabbed the edge of the table. Catherine made a choking sound. Patricia spoke over the noise. He'd purchased plane tickets to San Jose for November 3rd, 2 months from now. He'd opened bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and transferred $1.8 million. He'd rented an apartment in Costa Rica under his new name. He had a new passport being prepared. She projected more documents, emails discussing life insurance policies worth $2 million that would pay out to a third party, not to either Catherine or me. Communication with a contact about disappearing cleanly and starting fresh. Robert Harrison wasn't just a bigamist and a fraud, Patricia said, her voice ringing through the silent courtroom. He was planning to abandon both families, fake his death, collect insurance money, and escape with everything he'd stolen. The heart attack that killed him wasn't his exit strategy coming too early. It was the only thing that stopped him from destroying these women's lives even further. I couldn't breathe. He was going to leave us both. After 43 years, he was going to vanish and let me believe he was dead while he lived in paradise with stolen money. Catherine started crying. The judge's face had gone from stern to horrified. Reporters frantically scribbled notes. My children looked like they'd been struck. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in this court! Her voice shook with fury. This is the most egregious case of fraud I have seen in 30 years. On the bench, Judge Brennan's ruling was swift and uncompromising. She declared both wills invalid due to fraud and criminal intent. Robert Harrison's estate, she announced, her voice sharp as a blade, was built on systematic deception and theft from both of these women. This court will not allow his criminal activity to be rewarded. She appointed an independent executor to liquidate and distribute Robert's assets equitably. Catherine and I, as legal spouses who'd both been defrauded, would each receive 40% of the estate after all debts and legal fees were paid. The remaining 20% would be divided among all of Robert's children, mine and hers, equally. James Whitmore, Robert's business partner, was ordered to pay $300,000 in restitution for his role in concealing assets. He also faced criminal fraud charges. Within a month, his own business collapsed and his wife filed for divorce. Edward Cross, the lawyer who'd drafted the secret will, was reported to the State Bar Association. 6 months later, he was disbarred for professional misconduct. The house, the business, the rental properties, the vacation home in the Bahamas I'd never seen, everything was liquidated. After legal fees and restitution, Catherine and I each received approximately $1.6 million. It wasn't about the money for me. It was about justice. It was about making sure Robert's carefully constructed lies came crashing down around his memory. 3 weeks after the trial, Catherine and I met for coffee at a quiet cafe halfway between our towns. We sat across from each other, two women who'd shared a husband without knowing it, trying to find words for the impossible. I'm sorry, she said finally. I know I have nothing to apologize for, but I'm sorry anyway, for existing, for being part of his lie. Don't, I said firmly. You were a victim just like me. He used us both. We talked for 2 hours. She told me about her life. Teaching elementary school, raising Thomas and Emily alone while Robert traveled constantly for business. I told her about mine, the Sunday dinners, the garden, the 43 years of devotion. Our stories were mirrors of each other, and in that reflection we found an unexpected understanding. We weren't friends. The situation was too complicated, too painful for that, but we understood each other in a way no one else could. We'd both loved a man who'd never existed. Catherine returned to Vermont with her settlement. She paid off her house, set up college funds for her grandchildren, and started traveling, something Robert had always told her they couldn't afford. I stayed in New Hampshire, but transformed everything. I redecorated Robert's office, turning it into a bright reading room with plants and comfortable chairs. I ripped out the garden he'd built and planted new flowers. My choices, my colors, my design. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected while playing the perfect wife. I joined a book club, started taking art classes, and volunteered at a women's shelter, helping other women who'd been betrayed. I was finally living for myself. A year has passed since I opened that locked drawer and found the ring that shattered my world. Some mornings I still wake up angry, feeling the sting of 43 stolen years. There are days when I look at old photographs and wonder how I missed the signs that were right in front of me. The distant look in his eyes, the separate phone calls, the locked drawer I was forbidden to touch. But most days, I feel something I never expected: freedom. The chains of being Robert's wife, of living for his approval, of defining myself through his needs, they're gone. At 72 years old, I discovered who Margaret really is when she's not performing the role of devoted wife. I'm stronger than I knew. I'm braver than I imagined. And I refuse to let Robert's betrayal be the final chapter of my story. I've learned that grief and relief can exist together. I grieve the marriage I thought I had, but I feel relieved that I finally know the truth. Living a beautiful lie would have been worse than facing an ugly truth. At least now I can build something real. Catherine sends me Christmas cards now. We're not close, but there's a bond between us. Two survivors of the same storm. Her grandchildren don't know about me, and mine don't know about her family. Some truths are too complicated to explain, but we know, and that's enough. The moral of my story isn't just about betrayal. It's about blind trust. We're taught that good wives don't question their husbands, that love means never doubting, that suspicion destroys relationships. But sometimes the people closest to us hide the darkest secrets. Sometimes that small voice in your head saying, "Something isn't right," is trying to protect you. Trust is beautiful, but it should never make you blind. Love shouldn't require you to ignore your intuition. And devotion should never mean sacrificing your dignity, your security, or your right to the truth. I spent 43 years being the perfect wife to a man who didn't deserve 43 minutes of my time. Don't make my mistake. Your life is yours. Your voice matters. Your instincts are valid, and you are never too old to start over. Now I want to hear from you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have opened that locked drawer, or would you have left the secrets buried forever? Would you have fought for justice, or would you have walked away quietly? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to know what you think. If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you see trust and loyalty differently, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful, real stories like mine. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for letting me be heard. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your life.